In the previous video, Doohee ended up seeing what her husband's job is like when a contract with a client expires and thinking that the same thing happened to her father. She is shaken. However, because she loves Gu-won, the protagonist tries to remain by his side, but the demon has already understood how she feels and doesn't want any more confusion in the life of his beloved, who no longer has much peace. So he decided to leave and stay away from Doohee, until she was safe so that the same thing wouldn't happen in their past lives and her resentment towards him would pass. Over the next few days, our protagonist is once again alone, as she was before Gu-won showed up, but now she doesn't even have Madame Ju to keep her company. At one point, Doohee goes to the prosecutor's office to talk about the investigation into Suk-min's case, and the person assigned to take care of it was her date from the blind date that Madame Ju had arranged and that the protagonist ended up not showing up for because she had accidentally run into Gu-won. The chief prosecutor is always over the top, but he promised Doohee that it would be a transparent investigation as she requested. Unfortunately, Suk-min's body hasn't been found yet, and until then, the protagonist isn't completely safe, although it's almost impossible for him to survive that fall. As for Gu-won's foundation, he has handed over the management of the place to Mr. Park, who, despite the fact that the demon only disappeared a few days ago, is already distraught. Gu-won also left him his necklace with the symbol of the cross, which he had been wearing since he was a young master. Looking at the accessory, Mr. Park wonders if Doohee remembers his past life when he wears the necklace. In the director's office, the gang members also show up looking for Gu-won. They're happy to tell him about the opening of the restaurant they've set up. Now they've got a proper job, since the demon commented that they could only follow him into hell if they got one, and they're heartbroken when they find out that Gu-won has gone away for a while. In the next scene, we see Mrs. Shin talking to Mr. Park, and she comments that seeing Doohee sad, trying to put all her focus on work, breaks her heart, but anyway the woman will try to stay strong for her to help her recover from this phase. Suk-hoon is another one who's worried about the protagonist, so he pops in at lunch and dinner times to make sure she's at least eating. In one of their conversations, Suk-hoon comments that some time ago he heard something from Madame Ju that only made sense to him now. She once said that she hadn't planned to love Doohee so much, and that the more she loved her, the more painful it became. Now it's a week since Suk-min disappeared, and his wife is starting to get nervous, thinking that the man might still be alive somewhere. Returning to the protagonist, something strange has been happening to her. The woman is working late, so when she gets home she's very tired and sometimes even ends up sleeping on the sofa, but the next day Doohee wakes up in her bed in her pajamas. Once, when she woke up at dawn, the woman noticed that the side where Gu-won was sleeping was warm, but when she went to call him, she found herself alone in the apartment. At that moment, the protagonist began to think that perhaps the man hadn't gone that far. The days go by, and after hearing some advice from Mrs. Shin that she shouldn't ignore her feelings, the protagonist decides to go to the foundation that belonged to Gu-won to ease her longing for him a little. However, when she opens the demon's book and the photos fall out, the ones they took in the cabin that day they were chasing Do Jae-young, tears start streaming down the protagonist's face. Mr. Park ends up bumping into Doohee in the office, and he already knew that the woman was very sad, but when he saw her crying, the man decided that he should give the necklace that belonged to the demon to the protagonist. Later, the woman puts the accessory around her neck as she prepares to go to sleep, and as soon as she begins to dream, memories of her other life as Wulsum return. We discover a little more about who Wulsum was, and it turns out that when Lee-sun met her, she was about to take her own life. However, meeting this man who soon won her over, made her change her mind. Contrary to what Lee-sun thought, at no time did the woman blame him for her losing her life. In fact, Wulsum died with the thought of gratitude for the moments they spent together, because her life wasn't very good until she met him. When she wakes up, the protagonist thinks that Gu-won might be in the place where they first met in the past, so she gets dressed, and when she gets into her car, she realizes that something is wrong when she spots a gun. It turns out that Suk-min is alive, don't ask me how, and he knocks Doohee out. As soon as the woman wakes up, she's in an abandoned place, and there Suk-min begins to hurt her in order to attract Gu-won. The demon hadn't been able to locate him through his face, because Suk-min had burned part of his face in order to stop him. The man wants to provoke the demon into taking his life and disappearing, because Suk-min thinks that this is the only way to make Do-hee suffer, and he has changed his mind about taking his wife's life. Two important things: although Suk-min is a grown man, until now he hasn't had the maturity to see that he put himself in this situation of losing everything he has, and yet the man continues to blame Do-hee, accusing her of stealing what belonged to him. Another is that according to Gu-won's manual, if he interferes in bringing someone back to life or ends up taking a person's life, the man will simply cease to exist. In the end, Suk-min's plan works and he lures Gu-won away, but in the midst of the chaos, Do-hee ends up being shot and, out of his mind, Gu-won causes Suk-min's gun to explode in his hand and injure his face. Then the demon performs its last act and brings the protagonist back to life. As a result, he disappears and once again, Do-hee is heartbroken. Even God was moved by the end of this couple. The only things left behind by our beloved Gu-won were his wedding ring and necklace, and even the clocks in the office stopped working. And as soon as the protagonist told those who knew the truth about Gu-won, everyone was inconsolable. Returning to Do-hee, she had to spend Christmas in hospital, because when Mrs. Shin and Suk-hoon found her in her apartment after breaking down the door, she was in a worrying state. As soon as she was discharged, the protagonist decided to go to the place where the tattoo had been transferred to her body, and there she prayed with all her might for Gu-won to come back to life. The woman was even willing to sign a contract, but God was pleased. And so happiness returned to her sad life. In the next scene we see them enjoying each other's company, and as soon as she remembers, Do-hee puts the wedding ring back on her lover's finger. Later, Gu-won decides to go to the person responsible for bringing him back to thank her, and he's really grateful for that. Over the next few days, we see that everyone is very happy about Gu-won's return, even Suk-hoon, who couldn't stop hugging the man. Moving on to a moment when it's just our couple, Do-hee plucks up the courage to ask about the contract Gu-won had made with her father, and we discover that when the protagonist was in her mother's womb, there was an accident and the hospital couldn't attend to her because it was too full, so the woman would lose the child and perhaps even her life. But out of her husband's desperation, Gu-won showed up and the man signed in exchange for him saving them both. Despite the end her father met, this is something that pleases Do-hee, because otherwise she would have lost her life that had just begun, and once again, Gu-won had saved her. In the next scene we see Gu-won going to the gang's restaurant and everyone is very happy to see him there. Then we move on to Do-hee, who has decided to visit Suk-min in prison, just to show that she is doing very well, and contrary to what he thinks, Gu-won is back. This further wrecks the man's psyche, which is in chaos inside and out. The protagonist leaves, after making it clear that the only thing Suk-min destroyed was himself. And finally the day has come for Star Jean to make it big outside Korea. Now she's going to the UK, and before she leaves, Gu-won makes it clear that he'll always have a place for his wife at the foundation should she want to come back. The man gave Jae-young an umbrella as a present so that she would always remember him when she used it. And before she left for the airport, the woman decided to stop by the house where she used to live when she was little. There, a little girl bumped into the Jean star and she was all bruised up, while behind her a man came running and seemed to want to scold her. Analyzing the situation, Jae-young realized that the child was going through the same thing as her when the woman was little, so Star Jean decided to take her to the police station and ended up missing her flight to be with the girl. In the next scene we see that Ms. Shin has finally decided to come clean about her relationship with Mr. Park to the people at work, and they can now finally stop pretending they didn't know. It turns out that when they went to take some fun photos, there were some of the couple on the wall, and that's how they found out. After 4 months, we see Gu-won dealing with a contract, and now with the help of Mr. Park, the man is only taking those who deserve to go to that horrible place. Back at the family cluster, Suk-hoon is the one who has taken over as president of the company, and Do-hee is very happy to see how far he has come. As for Suk-min's case, the court sentenced him to death, so the protagonist can rest assured that this ghost won't come back to haunt her. The prosecutor also tells her that Madame Ju was diagnosed with cancer before she passed away. Although she didn't tell Doohee, the woman isn't upset and now understands why the lady was in such a hurry to marry her. The protagonist then pays a visit to Madame Ju's grave to have a chat and brings her a flower, as she was very fond of gardening. In the next scene we see the couple, and although there are fights between them, they support each other and love always prevails. What did you think of these episodes? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like it and share it to help me out. Until next time.